Welcome to the Board of Ethics. I guess this is a special meeting. July 1. And can we have a call? Let's see, I am calling the order. How about a roll call?
Okay. William Falsey is not present. Terry Kelly.
Here.
Kathleen King.
Here.
David Nesbitt.
Here.
Keith Silver.
Here.
Also present is Dee Ennis, Deputy Municipal Attorney, Glenda Regnard, Administrative Hearing Officer, Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk, and myself, Lisa Slusner, Clerk Staff Support. We have a quorum.
So for today's special meeting, we have 3 advisory opinions that we want to discuss, and some of that will be going in and out of deliberative session during those meetings. But we have the 3 advisory opinions to discuss. Do we have a motion to approve today's agenda?
Seconded.
Any opposition? All right, so it's approved. So we'll start with our advisory opinion 2015-5. Before we go into executive session, do we discuss the question itself first, or do we go into executive session and discuss the question?
I would think we would discuss the question or put it out there first, and then for
Yeah.
deliberations
And then-
go into executive.
Okay, let's.
And I suggest a reorder just to get through the more simple ones quickly. 2015-2 might be an easier one to get through. Although I will say the one that's been out there the longest is which one?
Let's see. That's the third one.
2014-5, I believe.
5. Is on 4.
4.
So either the oldest one or probably the
I mean, we
simplest
could do this in
one.
reverse order.
Yeah. Okay. How about that?
Now we get the oldest done first, then we
Mhm.
do the one that we think is pretty simple, and then get into the one that we just actually was brought to our attention last time. So we're reordering the agenda 3, 2, 1 as opposed to 1, 2, 3. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion passes. So we will start with then the advisory opinion 2014-4. Do we go into executive session for that?
The confidentiality was waived on that one.
It was, so we can discuss that on open record. So, if I recall, this is an opinion from the Board of Ethics on legislation discussing the measure to legalize recreational marijuana use in Alaska. We have gone through several drafts. We're on to our final draft for approval. I think the last draft has been given to us from Glenda. Do you have anything to add, Glenda, before we read this? What I'd like to do is actually, just in case everybody hasn't had a chance to read this, just take 5 minutes to review this, so we can at least have, so we're not talking over each other. Does anybody need 5 minutes to read this? I'd like 5 minutes.
Well, can I
Go
just
ahead.
point? I think I'm not sure. Is this the last draft? Remember, Terry had done one. You had done one, then Terry had done one, and then you had done one. And I think I came back with yet another version. Do you know if this is that version? And all that did was reorder things to incorporate both your versions.
Right, so if you look behind tab 4C,
Uh-huh.
the first document is the email from Julia Tucker to
Okay.
myself and to Dee asking what, actually proposing the question to us to be submitted for the board to consider. After that is a memorandum from myself to Julia, dated August 27, 2014, wherein I attempted to answer the questions. And this was after the board had had some discussion.
Because weren't we requested to give an informal opinion at first?
Correct.
Then they came back and asked for a more formalized version. Okay.
Exactly. And so the memo was in response to the info.
All right.
So that is a
She's talking about-
4-page memo that I drafted.
It's all
that was
stapled
sent to
together
Ms.
what she's
Tucker
talking
that
about
was
right now.
available.
So here's Glenda's draft on the back of
We've got a
that.
copy. After that,
And
you
then
look at, and you'll see
is
a
the
copy of the
ordinance.
resolution that was proposed.
And then this is her draft.
And that was
Third
what was
item.
before the board for review, as drafted right there.
Not that one.
Because that went through different
One right.
It
reiterations
did.
also.
It did go through different iterations, and so the
before.
one in
That
there was
one,
the one
that's
that was
the
actually
latest.
before the board to consider.
Okay.
So after the board deliberated, and there were several meetings, Terry drafted a response to be provided to the assembly, and then
A formal
a
response.
formal response. And then what happened in the interim was that resolution was amended, and a different resolution was then proposed. And so because of the nature of the resolution that actually went forward, it sort of obviated the prior opinions. So what we ended up doing, because there's been a request for something that could be published, we went back and I took what Terry had drafted and I took what I drafted and combined the two a bit. And that's where you see, keep flipping.
That would be, on my page it says Regnard draft.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Now, after that, I think Dee has made some changes
Yeah.
even more since then.
Yeah,
So
I reordered them, and I think it's a much easier way to read them. And
Where is
so
that?
I would need to just run upstairs and
Oh.
print some off,
Gee,
some
I
copies.
I have that, don't I?
I don't know. No, this is, I don't think so. This is a political activity marijuana draft, the one I did.
I
Well,
think
either way,
so.
I mean, it's in
Do
my.
you want, because it'll take less time if
Okay.
I go look for it than if you do. Let me see if I can
This was
find
just
it.
done before the last board meeting. And
Okay.
I just think editorially, it cleaned a lot of things out, but took out some words like clearly and
Okay.
nothing clear about this particular
So
provision.
the aim was to generate something that reflected the board's deliberations as well as what was presented to the board, which the original resolution was actually what the board considered. The board really didn't spend a lot of time looking at what the second round of that resolution. So, and provide some guidance, have an opinion that actually proposed some findings and some guidance for future action.
Right.
So hopefully that's the document that we have now.
Okay. If I may just take 2 minutes, I'll just read this really quick.
Mine is
Sure.
different.
Totally different?
Enough different that it's
Oh.
not worth doing that.
Let's do 4B then.
Let's do
Yeah.
4B then. Good idea. Okay, let's switch to
Good
4B
job.
then.
Good
4B, the confidentiality has not been waived, is that right?
Is this, no, it has been.
It has been waived?
Yeah, waive confidentiality right in the first, and she wants it.
You want to waive?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, on the
Oh,
advisory
very
opinion
good.
itself.
Okay, good. All right.
Do you see where it says waive confidentiality? Yeah.
For the
Well,
first
you were
time.
rolling your eyes at me. That
No,
was-
I was just like-
Wait a minute, it's actually
Do we,
pressed.
so do we have a draft opinion for this
We
one?
do. But can I tell you what's happened on this one? This is the one where we have respected the retained jurisdiction of the assembly chair to make conflict of interest determination. So that's not our bailiwick with respect to the assembly, but that our purview is disclosures. And so what this opinion does is first say, okay, he's a captain and a Swiftwater guy and this and that we tried to do a form and we didn't find it was going to be helpful. But then I went off on sort of a different path, and so I wanted to let you know what that path is. And what I said is, there really are elements that of things that go before the board, before the assembly, like the small purchases, which really don't, which clearly wouldn't result in conflict of interest stuff. We can't simply make that finding. So what I suggest is I say, well, how about here's 3 or 4 groups of things that we don't think there'll be a conflict of interest. But you, assembly, have to make that finding. If you make that finding, then, in a blanket fashion, if you make that finding, then pursuant to our authority, we will say you don't need to have a subsequent disclosure. So I went off let's find 4 little areas where probably we don't need to, so I thought it would be more helpful. So you'll see I'm trying to go through that path. I did run this through just for the heck of it, Assembly Counsel, who wasn't clear on that, but once I really explained that this is really more respectful of the retained jurisdiction of the Assembly, she just thought we should put more of the, all the standards of financial interest, and I'm less enamored with that approach just because I think this is a shorter, quicker approach to say what we want to say. So this reflects a change from last time when I gave it a lot more thought.
Okay.
It reflects thinking. Always a good thing.
The document I have is labeled Regnard draft,
Okay, let me
so that's the same
While you
one.
all read this, I can wrap it up. I'm sorry, I didn't give you.
Well, this is hot off the press.
This is Amy Damascus. I'm not sure whether drafts are appropriate to give to public members when they're drafts.
Yes, they are.
Not sure.
Our position is, I'm gonna say, until we get a formal opinion from the municipal attorney, I
Drafts
think you
are-
have to say no.
Just note it as draft, that's all you need to do.
Well, this particular document has not been, I wouldn't want to disseminate this until it has draft.
On it. Well, and the
On
other
it.
thing is really not your draft, the board's draft
Yeah.
at all, it's my
Right.
draft.
That's right. Yeah.
And usually maybe the compromise could be for the time being is to let you look at the draft, but would you return it after our discussion?
All you need to do is write on each
Okay,
page.
I don't agree with that, okay?
Okay,
I don't
I'll take a
know.
look at it and then I'll return it, and you can mark it draft later.
Okay, are you willing to return it?
Yeah, I'll return it before the meeting is ended.
Okay. And I'm not sure that that's a
And
correct
then-
procedure, but it's a relatively straightforward matter.
How did you come up with these, D, 1 through 4? Just
Amy-
off the top of your head?
Send me that, but also Amy and I had discussed them a little
okay.
bit in the past, that these are some
Has
subject
she-
matter. She has not seen this.
Okay.
And I would like her to see it to
Right.
make sure we don't have
Right.
factual inaccuracies. And she may be able to elaborate on these categories.
Mhm.
So would these 4 categories pretty much take care of the majority of the disclosures she's having
I
to
think
do?
so. I think so.
So the only thing that really come up with the labor contracts and anything
If-
directly with that?
Her work, the husband's work group. The other thing I need to, well, let me know when you're finished reading, because I remembered another thing I didn't put in here. It should be in here.
Let me know when everyone's had a chance to read this.
I've read it.
Has everybody had a chance to go through it? Okay. Thoughts?
Oh,
Did you
well,
want to have
one
any-
of the other
add
things I
anything?
didn't put in, though, I think that's essential, is that he's a household member. And
Hmm.
please throw that in the initial. It's an assumption. I put that in there somewhere.
Now that I see your edit, Kathleen, I go back and read it, and it is actually funny the way she wrote it.
What's that?
Oh, it should be who is
Yes.
hose. Okay, there's a clerical correction in the second one. Who?
Kind of almost like, well, unless you're from New York, then it'd probably be correct.
Thoughts? Anybody has thoughts? Mr. Kelly.
2 things that kind of came out of our discussion that could be reflected in this opinion. One, I thought we had ultimately told her that by and large you should be making these disclosures, and the assembly should be even if it's just chair training making it. And I'd like to see that reflected in here, because part of that was she's clearly getting pressure from Mr. Trainee and people, members of the assembly, to find some sort of way of making fewer disclosures, or not, or finding a form to do it. And we found that really wasn't going to be workable in most cases. And I think the opinion should reflect that it is the board's view, at least it seemed to me the discussion was that it was the board's view that she by and large should be making these disclosures, and while it's inconvenient and takes up several minutes of assembly meetings, the assembly, or at least Chair Trainee, should be reviewing them.
And with some, at least minimal deliberations, whether it's one line, that process can be streamlined, but it still should be brought up.
And again, yeah, part of the idea was to, just to give her, I don't want to say cover, but to say that when she's getting grief or criticism for all these disclosures, say, well, look, we went to the board and the board said this is, and by and large, this is the way it needs to get done. I'd like to see the opinion reflect that.
And then you had another point?
Along with that, it seemed to me we had reached the conclusion that a blanket waiver type thing is not really going to be possible for these kinds of cases. I mean, we can outline specific types of, areas, but I don't think we can create a kind of blanket. I mean, it seemed
We
like
actually came to a conclusion.
I thought we came to that conclusion. I mean, whereas we do that for those contract soliciting contractors. So, like, here's this blanket waiver for the year. But I think we agreed that that's something that would not be workable for
Well,
conflict of interest disclosures.
Yeah, the concern I'd have with this, and I'm not, is how does somebody, a member of the public, sitting in the audience, know that she has been given, say, these 4 things she doesn't have to disclose once it's been accepted by the assembly? Or the chair? But that was, I think, part of what that was a large part of our discussion last week is,
Either by form or by resolution, it's
Yeah.
still the same thing.
Right.
So.
It's not there every time.
right, I mean, unless
Is this,
it's possible to put some sort of disclosure within the agenda.
Would this be a public
there, so
document?
that people would know.
It would be on the web.
It'd be on the
you know,
website, so if any of it came up, they could just refer to this being on the.
Yeah.
Well, and so would, this anticipates a resolution, but I think you're saying
Oh,
that
okay.
that's a fact, that the board, we would offer this guidance. And this is a departure, Terry. This is something I thought through more and thought, isn't there something that'd be a little bit more helpful on really on totally routine matters?
Yeah,
But-
because what this is doing is essentially it's creating a 6 degrees of separation. When you have things that are happening with the fire department that he is not directly related to, then that should be okay.
Right.
That's essentially what the 4 points are.
Yeah, and that we would say these 3 or 4 things are routine, simple stuff that clearly we can see don't involve husband or, but that the assembly would by resolution, so they would have to agree with that, and only after they agreed with that would the disclosure requirement not be necessary, which is our purview. So Terry, you're absolutely right, it is a departure, but I guess the more as I was writing this, and we can just not have the 4 groups, but as I was writing this, there just clearly are so many of these smaller ones that really clearly don't involve the husband. Now, purchases of $1 million for air masks, well, of course, and CBAs. I mean, see,
Sure.
none of those fall within these little things. But whether an easement is granted by fire station number 6 on the other side of town, it's just so clearly not involved, and yet she doesn't want to put herself at risk. So again, I was hoping that isn't there a small group that we can say, hey, and by the way, administrative agreements or administrative letters, when different issues come up with the unions and they're not clearly resolved under the CBAs, they can reach a little side agreement. And the assembly says, hey, we want to know about all those side agreements because we used to have a ton of them that were unwritten. And they can be very simple, that the hours with this group should have been this, and that group is not his group. I mean, so they're really small matters. So.
Okay. Kathleen, did you have something?
The last sentence on the first paragraph, I would suggest removing that simply because it's not a part of
The other assembly
Back
members?
pattern.
Other assembly members?
Okay, sure.
And I tend to agree with with Mr. Kelly, Terry, about adding, because that was what we talked about, is that that kind of provides a basis for what we had decided. We concluded that a blanket waiver was not appropriate, and that the way that they were actually doing it right now was the proper way, but maybe we can streamline it by doing 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think that makes sense.
Okay, so blanket waiver not available.
Is that a fair summary?
Does that go far enough for you though, Terry? See, I guess I am trying to figure out those ones that just clearly don't need disclosure and can't, and I'm not sure that the public expects a response on an easement granted by, regarding another fire station across town. I mean, that even the public may be annoyed by the repetitive disclosures, and to the extent that they're not repetitive, then the ones like the $1 million purchase of air masks would be, it'd be incumbent upon the chair to ask about those and not just to find those are waived. You know, that,
I'm not suggesting get rid of 1, 2, 3, and 4.
yeah, that's
No,
not
okay,
Terry,
no,
though.
right. I mean, blanket waiver to me was we were trying to like excuse her from having to do anything.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
So that's
That's right, that's.
we have concluded that that doesn't work.
I mean, now, as far as 1, 2, 3, and 4 go, yeah, I do wonder, I mean, I'm just gonna have to admit that this whole issue strikes me as a solution in search of a problem. I mean, we're talking about several minutes, my understanding is we're talking about several minutes from every assembly meeting that gets spent on these disclosures. And so, we can have 1, 2, 3, and 4. I take, now Dee, how's the memechanism gonna work here? The assembly's gonna have to pass an ordinance or a resolution?
Or something.
Saying that in these sorts of areas,
That they
That we are-
we find there's not going to be a conflict.
that this is not.
And
that this-
because of that, then we wouldn't have to do the disclosure, then the disclosure.
Yeah, right.
Because we're only in the
So even though the
disclosure.
code says they should be evaluating these on a case-by-case basis, right? So we're gonna say, no, in these whole areas, you don't even have to read.
Well,
you
we're
don't even- I mean,
relying on Ms. Dombrowski, right, to decide which ones fall in 1, 2, 3, and 4, and which ones don't.
Well, and can I
Right,
say,
I see.
I guess what I see is, Terry, you're on one side of the issue, and I, as the scrivener, am not representing that issue. It's really just a vote, which way do you guys want to go? If people say, no, we think there should be disclosure all the time, even the most minuscule thing that we can't intervene, then you're on Terry's thing. If you don't, if you think there should be the 1, 2, 3, 4, go the other direction, and then let's work from that, because there's fundamental divide here, and we're not going to get a consensus. And we got to move forward on this meeting.
What do you think, I mean, about the idea, I mean, could we not say, this is an opinion to Ms. Dombrowski, couldn't we just simply say, if we agreed that, look, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the kind of things that you don't need to disclose? That is the jurisdiction of this board to say that.
I don't think it is. Because it's the chair of the assembly that says what are the okay, I'm sorry, so you're putting it in the disclosure.
That's right,
Okay, I'm
that's
sorry.
right. And
Okay.
then just simple, and then she's
Okay.
covered, right? If she doesn't disclose, this gives her immunity from potential violation of the code, because we've told her up front, areas that fall in 1, 2, and 3, and 4 don't even need to be disclosed. And then that way, the assembly doesn't have to get into creating an ordinance or a resolution that creates these sort of like pockets of areas that are now going to be exempt from the code. She's come to us asking for advice. How often do I need to disclose? Our view is we can't give you a waiver. You should be disclosing most of the time. But here are 4 sample areas where you don't need to disclose. This is our advice to you. You're now covered by that advice because it's an official advice.
And that doesn't. That's not asking the assembly to pass a resolution
No.
or
The
anything.
assembly doesn't have to do.
I like that a lot.
Public process, okay.
I
Good.
think that sounds very good. Can we? So we're going to have to finalize a document. Can we do that by next meeting?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah,
Very good.
because the areas I find 1, 2, 3, and 4 acceptable.
Yeah, I think
those
that's
are
right.
areas where
And then I could
But
run
they're
this
so
by Amy
beyond-
for factual stuff.
Right. They're just too.
well, they're so
extenuating.
tangential. I mean, like what has to be
Tangential.
disclosed, right? A private or financial interest that you have in the matter. Are 1, 2, 3, and 4 are sort of saying, look, you really don't have a private or financial interest in these kinds of matters. It may,
Yeah.
in a kind of very superficial way, appear that way since the fire department is involved, but it's so tangential that we can sort of say a priori that mean that disclosure is not even necessary.
Okay.
And then I could add a paragraph or two in outlining what those factors are.
Which is always nice to have. I think
Yeah.
it's always nice
Okay,
to
yeah,
have.
and I
some
just
sort of
didn't
piece
have
with
time to
those.
throw the code in this.
Okay, do you feel comfortable
so I'll add
drafting
those.
that,
Yep,
Dee?
I do, and it
Okay.
can easily be done by
Yes,
this.
Okay, good.
and I feel comfortable with that as
Does
well.
everybody agree with
That's-
this?
That's accomplishing the same thing, actually,
Yeah.
with less work,
Yep.
less action by the assembly to do it. We're
No, we don't
actually
need a-
accomplishing what she was told to do.
Good. We don't need a vote. We're just going to approve it next time. Okay, good. All right, let's go to.
Back to C.
Back to
Okay,
C.
I did not run upstairs to get it, but maybe
Oh,
while
oh.
Bill is addressing the group.
Mr. Falsey. Yes.
A few months. Thought, I don't want to hang out with you. I want to hang out with Glenda D.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations, I'm telling you.
As the guardians of the ethics code, you are probably well aware the municipal employee cannot be on the board of ethics. So I can submit some kind of letter of resignation to someone. I don't know if it goes to you or Barbara. You or.
Actually, you're appointed by the mayor, so it probably should go to the mayor, but if you'd like to submit it to Lisa, or I will get it.
I'd like to see a copy of that. No.
Unfortunately, my plan is going to backfire because even though I'm distancing myself from this motley crew, now I'm subject to your jurisdiction.
Absolutely. I have several notices of potential violation already drawn.
I think Ona, is it Ona Browse,
Mhm.
is the new, it's my understanding she'll be the boards and commissions person in the mayor's office. And you could probably find her email on
Yes.
the line,
No.
but if
Oh,
you
from
want
that
to
line.
send it to us,
No.
we'll get it to
Okay,
her.
I
and-
want to have.
Well, that'd be great, yes.
Okay.
So I think I'll actually depart. pending-
But one of your first assignments is to find somebody else to replace you.
Yeah, I think that's true. I found Terry Kelly once upon a time.
That's right.
Maybe
That's
I'll
true.
find him.
Yeah, you kinda like want-
Yes. You might not want to finding anyone.
But it really has been
Good luck.
great working with all of you for the brief period that it did turn out for me. I wanted to come by and say goodbye.
Yeah, best wishes to you.
Thank you.
Yes. The city's, our view is that the city's law department is in excellent
In
hands.
outstanding hands. That's
So
right.
yeah, now your Tuesday nights are taking up.
I thought about that pretty seriously before I said yes. But I get to spend time with you, so.
Congratulations.
Once again, on that. Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
All right, so should we do 4A then?
Well, might as well start on it. Barbara, you're here. Is now a good time to first have the question posed, and then we'll go into an executive session?
Okay, I would like Dee to be here if you wouldn't
Oh,
mind.
okay.
I mean,
No,
I
that's
think,
fine.
you know, it's clear that we don't agree. And I
Okay.
think that it's just important, I don't want to sandbag or
No,
anything.
that's fine.
So if you wouldn't mind.
No, I'm just trying to be expeditious with our time. Yeah.
Are there things that the board needs to read? Maybe?
Well, we can't read for
That's right, we can't read
C.
for A.
We
I mean, I suppose for 4C, we could read the other drafts
Glenda's.
that were there. We could read Glenda's and my
Well,
original, just to sort of see how,
Yeah.
what changes are going to be made.
Yeah, D's was taken from Glenda's final draft, so
Mhm.
that'd be.
He did, many years ago, yeah.
and then you refound.
He was leaving for DC. He was moving to DC, and so he was looking for someone to take over. He said, "Hey, this is probably something you'd be pretty interested
That's right, because he served on us many years ago, didn't
in." Mm-hmm.
Lisa, did you say next Wednesday is the
Is the regular meeting.
schedule, and there's no other specials?
No.
So next Wednesday, and then the next one would be August.
The second, week of August. Man, I don't have a calendar. Let me go grab it.
12th.
So,
Okay, so the next one then in July will be mine.
Your last one? Oh, no. No, this is not okay. I have so many things to hand to you. What, are
Just
you?
send me an email.
Are you rotating?
No,
You're leaving?
I'm leaving.
You're really leaving?
I'm leaving.
Where, may we ask, where are you headed?
Sure. My family is in need of me more than I'm needed here, so I have to head back to Louisiana.
You're leaving state?
I'm leaving state
Oh, okay.
in August, so, but I will be gone right before the August
Growth meeting.
That's why I was asking.
Well, as part of your exit, you will have to find a good replacement.
Okay.
We cannot have
I
any
some ideas.
overlapping gaps.
and it can't be Bill, so.
That's right.
No, I can't be Bill. But I'll be here for the next meeting.
Okay.
That I don't think I'll
We will be very, you'll be very, very missed.
Yeah, you'll
Thank
be
you.
there. Oh my
This
goodness,
has been a lot
yeah.
of fun.
Mhm.
So if you have anything to sign at this meeting.
Yes, that's the shot across the bow.
Well, at least you gave us a warning. He
Yeah,
didn't give us a
that's
warning.
I am. I'm giving
I
plenty
had,
of
I had to
warning,
read
yeah.
it in the newspaper.
So you said we have meeting next week? Next Wednesday?
On the 8th.
Okay.
You may have to have a special meeting, another special meeting in July. So Glenda can come.
Because I have done all the homework that's assigned to me, so I want to make sure all that at least gets handled before I go.
Before you leave.
Yeah. Because I did do all of my.
She vetted those 50-something
done.
present economic interest forms
Mhm.
for you. Got it down to 2?
Yep. Got it down to 2.
So in terms of this one,
Hmm.
as I recall, the main the sort of like bottom line conclusion was that the Assembly can create a kind of non-binding resolution in which it states its view on a matter,
Mhm.
but that the way it states the view
Mhm.
has to be
Factually.
Yeah, it can't be polemical, right? So
Right.
it can't be. So it has to be, more or less rooted in facts, avoiding, unsupported conclusory statements. But that it's certainly okay for them. So it's okay to take a particular stance, not okay to do it in a polemic way.
Which was vote against this, or
Well, and then certainly any exhortation to the public that they ought to vote in a particular way, we saw
Right.
as polemic. We also saw as polemic any, inflammatory language, opinionated, value-oriented language.
That's what we told him. in our
And that's what we told him,
informal-
just sort of orally, that was, and as much as possible, because you're absolutely right, what has bedeviled us here is the moving target, right?
It
The
did,
resolution
it
won't
actually,
change.
it absolutely became, because we were presented with, here's the document that we want the Assembly to take up. What do you think of this document? The board found that document as presented was very partisan, inflammatory, was politically
Okay.
right.
And if you look at
then all
my
of a
draft,
sudden,
if you-
they came back
yeah.
with, oh, never mind, forget that one, this is the one we want to present.
Right.
And then we switched gears to that,
Right.
in which it was more informational in tone.
it was.
Didn't have
Yeah,
any
that
kind
was
of
right.
exhortation.
I think we actually.
And then it
Yeah.
kind of just flittered.
Okay.
Want to go back to this one?
Mm-hmm.
But then a lot of the discussion too, Terry, was if it is a document that is, first, is it partisan? If it is partisan, then what if one of these individuals distributes, broadcasts, publishes, the members of the clerk staff, members of the assembly staff, if they're being tasked with distributing it, publishing it, how do those terms affect them, and would it result in a violation of the code? And
Right.
that's when it really got a high drop.
Everybody read it, but I can also, can walk through what I did, because it just is literally a combination of Terry's and stuff. Getting two great minds together. Did I give you one?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. He's the devil.
Sorry.
They were actually
Wow.
talking about the next item. Oh, they were? Well, they haven't yet.
Now, did I keep on? Yeah.
If we may just have 2 more minutes to read this, and then we'll.
And I can walk you through just what I took from each of their drafts. No new original thought.
So, without looking side by side, I'm struggling.
They're very similar.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, so they're very similar. You know, better.
Struggling to see where the difference is.
No.
I don't know. He's not up, he hasn't EOD yet. He hasn't entered on TV, so maybe before he actually enters on TV.
Well, he still has to go through the process to get recommended by their mayor to be assembly. It's not like they're just asking somebody to apply. Question.
How's everybody doing? Need more time? Are we ready?
I think I'm ready.
I don't mean to push anybody. I just want to make.
We've done 14 minutes.
Any?
Can I try
Yes,
to tell you what
Dee.
I tried to do?
Yeah, dive right in there.
This is really literally, I don't know if I put any new words in here. It's like take bits and pieces of the last two opinions. What I try to do is lay out the code section that was laid out, define that the board did think the resolution was partisan, and I think that's helpful to put that, why you think that. Also, that I like the historical business about how elected officials weren't prohibited from this type of activity in our history, but under the new code, it may or may not, under that very difficult code section found in the employees section, that it may or may not, if you look at the plain meaning of the wording, it appears to apply. So note that, but note there's a history here. But then finally, and then the other concern was if you started looking at some of these terms, for instance, published broadcast, is the act of a clerk putting this on the agenda, is that publishing, broadcasting, distributing, that you could catch a whole bunch of people in this, and counsel who are involved in these processes. So note, hey, that's a big problem with the language of this code section. And because of that problem, we don't want to say one way or the other. We think that the code section is not clear enough to prohibit behavior or prohibit the Assembly from passing a marijuana resolution, anti-marijuana resolution. And that, however, the resolution should be more informational, which was done first, and then second, that code section badly needs to be amended because it's just, almost impossible to apply currently. And of course, in response to all of this, I think, we had given this verbal opinion earlier on. The Election and Ethics Board has asked us to do a rewrite, which we've started. So it's just trying to get those kernels. Code section, it is partisan. History allowed Assembly members to do this. If you apply the strict terms of this code, it would, if anybody even shuffled a piece of paper in the clerk's office, it would be prohibited political activity, which certainly can't be a logical intent of this code section.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was trying to accomplish.
Comments? Suggestions?
In the second,
Mm-hmm. Starting based
third
on.
full paragraph of page 2, the last sentence, based on the political nature of the topic of legalized marijuana, the resolution appears to represent the views and opinions only of a portion of the citizen, which is the hallmark of the definition of not representing the public interest at large. My feeling is that, at least thinking about our discussions, that's not what gave us heartburn about the resolution. I mean, to say that the Assembly can take a stand means that the Assembly will often take a stand that not every citizen in Anchorage agrees with. And we're sort of saying partisan doesn't preclude the Assembly from doing that. It's the way that it gets done is what gave us heartburn, right? So it's the polemics that gave us heartburn. And so I don't think that sentence reflects the decision that we had reached and the reasoning that we're using. The rest of the paragraph is great because it precisely is hitting on the point. So there's sort of like the position that the Assembly takes and then the way that they advocate for that position. It seemed to me that we had decided to become sort of content neutral in terms of the position, that the Assembly has the right to state its view on the controversies of the day. But if it does so in a polemical way, then it's becoming partisan in how it's doing so. Whereas that last sentence begins sort of mixing up the way it's getting done and the position that it's actually taken.
I agree. I mean, because that would be like saying before the Assembly passes a resolution, they have to take a tone of who
Neutrality.
the majority
Yeah.
of the public, and they can't do that, and they shouldn't be required to have to do that. They should be able to
I
issue their resolutions without having to judge how many people are in favor of it in the community.
And Glenda, that was your wording. Do you think it's important to leave in, or you talk a little bit about that at the beginning of the discussion by, and I'm sorry if you
No.
don't mind me.
Yeah?
Well, I think because the resolution that was initially presented was
Right.
highly partisan. It just was. And that was, bear in mind, at the time that this was drafted, or at the time that language was drafted, we had not had the benefit of seeing the second round of the resolution.
Okay.
So that, may have changed after the fact, but at the time, if you look at that moment in history, that did capture what was presented to the board for its view.
Okay, so.
And partisan, and the material of a partisan nature is the terminology in the code itself. So, was that material as it was presented, the resolution, partisan in nature? My recollection was that the board felt that it was.
Mm-hmm.
But
I mean, I'm not
taking
wedded
it
to
out
that,
now,
certainly.
okay.
But
If
I-
that's not the board's view,
Right.
that's the most important thing is that this document reflects the board's deliberation and the board's position.
And I take it we found it to be, that first resolution, we found it to be partisan, not because the Assembly was taking a stand
Mhm.
on legalization of marijuana, but because of the way they presented their view and ultimately their exhortation to citizens to vote in a particular way, which we felt went over the
Correct.
line. So I'm wondering, my second comment about this paragraph, I'm wondering if we take the last sentence out, and then what do you think about the idea of either here or at the end of the opinion, including a couple of the examples that we have in mind? And I've got those those are in one of my first drafts that are in there, sort of just pointing out, for instance, when the resolution states, and then quote one of the more inflammatory sections, it would say, this is going beyond factual information, these are conclusory statements, these are predictions which may or may not come true. But, you know, and you sort of give a couple examples of what we have in mind by things that have crossed
Terry,
the line.
did you have a paragraph in your draft that said that? That did just what you're doing?
Oh, yeah, the last one, because remember, my first draft actually probably went too far. We started micromanaging. I started saying, here are several parts of that resolution,
That's what I'm
and
thinking,
here's
can
how
we
they should be
just borrow
rewritten.
that right
Can we
now?
borrow that language?
Is it, there's two in here, there's draft
It's-
one and draft
If you look at draft one, the second page, really got into,
Oh, there's the-
it's
what you wanted
three
for the-
bullet points,
Okay.
and saying, like, here is where the draft says, where the resolution says this, and this. This is too far, and here's, you know, a better way that you either remove this or put this in a more factual way.
And one of the questions I was gonna ask, this is strictly a logistical question, was when this gets posted, will there be, will it include what was originally floated for review? I mean, it's otherwise, you're looking at this in a
Right.
vacuum,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it says, is the resolution material of a partisan in nature? The reader won't know what we're talking about if they can't
Mhm.
review what was presented.
I agree, so a
is
copy of that original
available
resolution
for
should be
review?
included in the opinion.
I agree.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
agree.
We're only looking at a
Absolutely.
fraction, or the public is only looking at a piece of the record.
And that's why
And
at
it-
least we would want to include, it might be a nice idea to include a couple of these examples in
Right.
the opinion, so
Right.
a member of the public just reading go, oh, okay, I can see what they're talking about.
Exactly, either that, or if the original resolution could be linked in to, so that there could be review too.
Well, now
I
that
don't
was
know.
wasn't, if I may ask, Mr. Trainee, was that original resolution ever, did it become an I mean, was it published, was it in the?
The clerk's office would have published it.
Okay.
It was an object for discussion, but it was never passed by the assembly.
Okay,
One-
but it was in the assembly, I call it
It's
paste,
a
but
public
you're not
document.
paste, so.
No, I'm
it
not
was-
paste.
It was.
Could we,
Sire, we would, sire is the next step.
one
so.
way of doing it also would be not only including a copy of it, but also under ballot measure number 2 in the first paragraph, maybe adding some identifying, like a date or a number or something that clearly identifies that particular document to this document.
Yeah, or you know, or attach it
Attach
to this
it.
document, just say, you know,
Yeah.
see attachment
See
one.
attached.
The ballot?
Right.
The actual
Or
The
no,
original
it-
resolution
well, it
that we're
says
reviewing.
in this case ballot measure number 2. Is that not what we were doing? Oh, no, sorry, we were doing a resolution.
Resolution,
Yeah,
okay.
No, that's right. No, I agree.
You were talking about a
Yeah,
resolution
yeah,
about
yeah,
ballot
right.
measure 2.
Right.
Then can I ask the board, if you look at that page of Terry's draft, can we just insert that whole thing? Okay, yeah, right there, in, right after where we just took out that last sentence. That based on the political nature.
And what we could do is, it should be removed. It would be better as, oh, I see, parallel.
Now, at the time, that gave the board some heartburn because folks didn't like the idea that we
The
were trying to go in.
micromanaging.
Right, we're
micromanaging
telling them
the
what to do,
assembly.
yeah. I
But
was
it might be
saying,
helpful, it might be helpful, at least in this, and we can tone down the editorial suggestions and just make it more, here's what the board found problematic
We'll take
about
out the,
this
it should
kind
be
of language.
removed.
yeah, it should be removed. Maybe we even take out the suggestion of what it should say. It would be better as, and then eliminate your whereas. Basically, what we're saying is, instead of rewriting it for them, we're simply saying what you gave us is not appropriate because this.
Well, and that might be more helpful for future, assembly members and like saying, okay, let's look back, okay,
Yeah.
what was the kind of language that gave the board
And
problems?
actually, how about just the first one, potent and dangerous to children, one, and just say the statement is inflammatory and conclusory,
Mhm.
goes beyond, and then the last one, which urges voters to have a
Mhm.
vote. Just put those 2 paragraphs in.
And then
That's it.
eliminate the middle one.
Yeah, the middle 2.
That sounds good.
With just 2
Yeah.
examples, okay, so I'll put in Terry's first draft.
And may I make a
Page two.
suggestion too? This is kind of stylistic, but if I'm reading this, there's a lot of information in here.
Mhm.
I would love to have some sort of conclusory paragraph at the very beginning
Oh, at the
to
beginning?
to let people know where we're going. And this adds in the reading so that, like if you're reading any kind of legal opinion, they always have a summary at the first part that kind of lets you know where they're going with everything. So you don't have to go through 3 pages of brilliant thinking to get to the very end and say, okay, what did they say? Right? If we could have some, and I
Yeah, just a
really
few sentences, right?
like I really like this language in the middle of of the 4th paragraph, right above where we're just talking, however that expression has boundaries, should be rooted in facts, void of, that kind of, something like that, the language should be like that in a conclusory statement at the very beginning. I think that would help the reader.
Yeah, and then I think what also might help too is below your short answer, just doing like a little fact, well, something to explain how this came before us, what we considered, how it was asked that we review our response. I mean, just to set the, because, I mean, I've never seen this before, and I'm looking at this, reading this as a public person, and I'm not really, I understand it because I have backup paperwork, but I don't understand where you're going.
And that's a
with
good
this.
point, because
Mhm.
we've all looked at it
Yeah.
10
Right.
times.
No, that's a great
Please,
point,
great.
because that would give the public an idea of why it came to our attention.
And this
to
is
begin
very
with.
important. I
Yeah.
mean, this is an important thing.
Can we, who was last, you
I
last touched it. Can you summarize this and have it ready for next meeting?
Yep.
Okay. I think we're close.
You
I think
just
we're
tell my
ready.
new
to-
boss that I have a lot of ethics work to do.
Yes, I'll be happy to.
Well,
He was,
Dee, I mean, Dee, I can do it, Dee, if
Did
you're,
You
Would
just tell my new
if you're
boss I have a lot of ethics
Oh.
homework here.
Dee, I can do it if your plate is.
You know, I wouldn't mind that, because you have
Okay.
your paragraph here,
Okay.
and you
Yeah,
know
sure.
the facts.
and you understand.
Could you send me a
Also-
Word version
Yes.
of
Perfect.
this so I can?
Oh, that's a much better assignment.
Okay.
Send
All right.
Terry-
I think we'll be ready to sign that also next.
And Lisa, if it's floating around, if you have a Word version of this, I probably have it somewhere on my computer, but if you could send me a Word version also of my
Of yours?
draft, what's marked Kelly draft 1.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, make sure you have the same one. If you're anything like me, I got draft.
I've probably got
dates,
it on your, but I tell you, if I do a search Kelly draft, right, how many documents do you think comes up?
Very good.
All right, good. So
Okay.
4A then?
4A.
We have time when we're ready.
Do you want to extend the
4A.
meeting?
Okay, I've got about 15 minutes before I must leave. Can we expend, so I guess we move to extend the meeting. If someone needs to leave, we still need, 3 people here? But if someone needs to leave.
I'm okay.
You're okay?
Yeah.
All right, so can we, I move to extend the meeting
So
15
moved.
minutes.
Second?
Second, any opposition? All right, we got 15 minutes
Okay.
to get as far as we can with this. I would love to be
And
able to.
this, I think,
Yes,
is a
forward.
very,
Yeah, we're gonna,
Go ahead and pass out.
Yeah.
While you're passing out, I'm gonna pass out too. So one of the things I talked to Dee about this morning is that I think there needs to be a request for a formal opinion.
on
So-
this matter.
Yes.
Right?
Do you have one? Okay, so I did one. And it's fairly inartfully written because
can I ask a little background here? I mean, I felt like last time when we came to the meeting, this got kind of set to us without it going through
And that's what I think Barb was
the right
talking
channels,
about, is that it
because
was-
we were kind of handed materials without having a chance to review them ahead of time, and I'd hate for this board to be jumped on like that.
So this is what I would again say is my fairly inartful request. And just one of the things that I would like to clarify is in the paragraph with the request at the bottom. It does say that as you know, the municipal clerk, the deputy municipal attorney, and the ombudsman now can request advisory opinions from you. And I say that Ernie made this request, and that is true. But as well, the chair of the assembly asked me to proceed with this request. So I want to make sure that you understand that my request was partially from the chair of the Assembly Ethics and Elections Committee, but also from the chair of the assembly. And so that's the way I formulated the question before you. And I admitted, they asked me to pass this out earlier, and I said no, because you weren't here, because we disagreed. So I just want to make sure that we all disagree, that
Yeah,
I'm not,
agree to
I'm
disagree.
admitting that Dee and I disagree about the question presented to you.
About the question or about the
Question.
answer to the question?
I was just
I
on
would
the answer
argue,
part.
I would argue that we disagree with the question as well.
I think the question has been modified to reach an answer.
He
I bet. What? No, I
who
don't know that.
controls the issue controls
Yeah.
the, okay.
But I do think that the question is whether the assembly can rely on your previous opinion, and that I think that the issue before the assembly is that your prior opinion said it was a substantial financial and personal interest, it was a conflict, to extend terms.
Mhm.
So I think that the assembly should be able to rely on that prior opinion that truncating a term is not a substantial personal or financial interest.
Unless you're the person who votes against it.
But, Mr. Silver, I am going to argue that that is not and should not be an issue before you. I do not see how voting one way or another can possibly raise the conflict. In fact, my argument, which Dee and I have discussed, is voting against it is voting for the status quo. That is not voting to extend your term. It is not a conflict. But that is my opinion.
Right, because you're voting for something that is currently in existence that has been gone through the proper. Right, that's an interesting point.
So I would argue that there is some danger in saying voting for or against something that makes it the conflict. That can't be the case, because how can the members ever make a decision on whether we've got to go, we have the question, and we need to go through and say, look at those 5 questions in the code and say, is the matter before them a substantial financial interest? Is it a substantial, all of those questions. And it has to be the same
Right,
whether you
right.
vote yes or no. Sorry.
Okay.
I understand, I'm just,
Does it have to be a substantial adverse financial interest or a substantial
Yeah,
positive
with
financial
due,
interest?
I have to say, with due respect, I think that the board was taking a different position than Barbara. But having said that, under the board's reasoning, there was a way out of this conundrum, number one. And number two, assembly people have now come to me and asked to look at the rule of necessity, and I wanted to provide materials about that to you, which other jurisdictions have adopted.
We were thinking about this one.
And it's also, it arose in a judicial context with judges. If they're ruling on a case that affects retirement benefits for federal officials, for instance, it's primarily in the federal system, then theoretically they would all be, just like this, disqualified. And so there's a rule of necessity. And it's based on quorum, that you can only apply it if it's necessary to get the disqualified members to be able to vote, because to meet quorum requirements. So if someone's sick, and they would have had enough qualified members if that person was there, you can't use that rule of necessity. So it's made for situations like this. It's a doctrine of last resort type of things. There's other examples of this within our municipal system, but they're not, because they weren't highly publicized.
So can we, as I understand the rule of necessity, that is if everybody has a conflict and nobody has a conflict?
No, I'd have to explain the rule of
Okay, I'm
necessity
sorry.
more, but I think there's 2 ways through this maze that are effective without. I think Barbara would like us not to reach that first part because she's worried about precedent. To me, it was part of the board's decision, but there are ways out of the problem.
Barb, I have a question for you too.
Okay,
bef-
can I say 3 things? Number one, the board had discussion last time, but it was based on the draft opinion that was handed to you, and you had a discussion about that, but you didn't have a question before you. So I'm gonna argue your discussion was probably premature. Number 2, I think you have to make a decision and look at the questions in the code about a substantial financial or personal interest. Make sure that there is one first before you have that discussion or debate. And third, Dee brought up the rule of necessity. The rule of necessity, as she said, is a last resort. You don't need to get there until you've decided that there's a conflict.
We've heard both sides. Is there a confidentiality issue in this question? Do we need to have an executive session, or can we discuss this out in the open?
Well,
The questions have been presented.
I think I have spoken to the chairman. He was out of town at your last meeting. He directed me to appear and make sure that so I do not think there's a conflict since he asked me to do it in public. I think, of course, your deliberations, certainly, I don't need to be here for that.
So can I get a clarification?
Yes.
So is this a request for an advisory opinion?
Is this a request
Now,
for a
yes,
written?
well, informal.
Ethics.
Yeah, so what does that mean?
What is an informal?
Don't know. What does
Well,
that mean?
I think originally, the reason it was an informal request was because the assembly didn't want to wait for a formal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
That's the request. However, since you are going forward with a formal opinion, you may rely on that and just change it and say, we're issuing a formal opinion. That's what your chair told the board of the Assembly Ethics and Elections Committee, that you had decided this was sufficiently complex that you wanted to go forward with a formal opinion. I'm just giving you a request. You can change it.
Lisa, can we get a form then? Can we get an advisory opinion form and have that properly filled out? And
I thought it was the reverse, that we informally said we think that older opinion does apply, and then when you went to the Election and Ethics Subcommittee, they said, well, then put it in a formal opinion, that we.
No, I didn't, no, that's not my recollection. What I was intending to say at that meeting is that this question that came to us today has brought up a lot of discussion that we are not comfortable issuing any opinion right now. And then Mr. Hall said, okay, take your time, get back to us. And I said, and then I promised him that we would be absolutely as expeditious as possible. I don't recall discussing whether we on our own were going to draft a formal response. I don't remember whether we requested we requested that we be allowed to give a formal response, because at that time we hadn't even seen a question.
Yeah,
So I don't know whether if we're being if the question before us is asking for a formal opinion, we'll be happy to give one. If we're being asked for an informal, then we need to figure out what exactly is being asked of us.
I would say, yeah, because we don't need to do a formal opinion if you don't want one. And I would say the rule of necessity, I'm not asking this board to adopt that. I'm in this proposed draft, it was saying that you've seen it and yeah, maybe that's an idea for the assembly. And as a matter of fact, a rule of necessity is going to be introduced on this next addendum. I just didn't have time to do it, but I was going to show it to you all. So it's going to be introduced by the assembly. There'll be at least a month for people to have comments. And
What
so,
was? Did you say you gave us the rule of necessity?
I haven't yet.
Paperwork. Oh,
This
okay.
is, it's not the actual draft form, it's just some stuff I got pulled off of the internet that I thought was very helpful,
Oh, okay.
explanatory. I didn't have time to do the AO. So
And-
the first part is,
And did you say that this is what the assembly is proposing to do?
an assembly person has asked me to draft a rule of necessity that they will sponsor.
Oh.
They came to me. The Department of Law often drafts AOs and AMs for the assembly as well as for the administration.
Because another issue that I remember, this was all on open record last time, so I don't, was Mr. Falsey's issue. And that is whether if a person who is proposing this or who is sponsoring this legislation, if this person is okay to sponsor it, because of the same reasoning in our previous opinion, sponsors it, then it's an issue for the assembly to determine whether there's a conflict.
Can I say,
Yeah.
in the opinion I wrote for the draft opinion, that's exactly what it says, that if, we don't need to worry about all this stuff, because in
Right.
this particular instance, Mr. Honeman was a co-sponsor.
Mhm.
He is someone that has an intervening election cycle, does not have the conflict of interest, so he's a sponsor. Chairman Trainee also has that intervening, and the chair is the one who has the responsibility to rule on the disclosures of the other chair. Mr. Trainee can rule for or against whether they have a conflict, and the meeting can proceed. So there is a solution. Is that not
Right,
correct?
so Ms. Jones, yeah.
Well, I think it's a solution looking for a problem, because I do not understand why Mr. Flynn, who sponsored this, whose term is up in November of 2017, I do not understand why he has a conflict.
I see.
Because you haven't gone through the steps to look at what the substantial financial or personal interest is.
So if I may summarize
Mm-hmm.
the issue, it sounds to me like there's an issue about whether one way to approach this from the board's perspective is to say that this doesn't properly come before us because there's an intervening election with the sponsorship. We don't even need to address this issue. And it can go before the assembly, it's their purview. The other way to approach this is to say, well, let's take a stab at this and make a decision that if you're truncating your elections, then it's okay. Oh, that's another approach. Or to say, it's not okay, but here's a way out. I see 3 different avenues going forward. Is this a proper summary of kind of where we're at?
Yes, I
All
would
right.
agree with that, Mr. Chair.
I like that. I like summarizing at least the issues so I understand them.
Mhm.
Yes.
I mean, my suggestion would be for those who requested the informal and/or formal opinion to withdraw it. And it's done in terms of our board.
Well, but
I don't think you
my-
can have your cake and eat it too.
You know, that's fine, but I thought that you requested the opinion.
Well, it sounds like Ms. Jones is requesting that we actually come up with an opinion that has some sort of presidential value. But
Okay, well,
maybe
let's,
I'm wrong.
okay, so we need to know whether the board is requesting that, and I'm not sure how appropriate that is to, well, whether the board wants to do that, whether they want to do that. If you are willing to withdraw whatever is on the table from the clerk's office, then the board could decide whether they think this is an important enough issue when there appears to be an apparent solution and a legislation which would address this being filed. Is it worth this type of effort to write this opinion?
Well, I guess the question, I mean, so are you or are you not making a request for an advisory opinion from the board on this matter?
May I?
So,
Just
so
set
yeah,
up the
no,
background?
no.
No?
Yes or no? Are you or are you not making a request? Because I'm not going
Right.
to talk about this anymore unless we have some sort of specific request on the table.
I agree.
believe that either the municipal attorney or the clerk or the ombudsman can make a request.
Sure.
My understanding was that the municipal attorney through D made a request, which was what she laid on the table at your last meeting. And my response was what I gave you today. So if Dee's withdrawing her request, I'll withdraw my request.
You know, one way to approach this might be have a proposal, is that everybody take a step back and then give us a form that we're accustomed to seeing that has, if that's what you want, that's something that we
Right.
can then, that because right now we're kind of getting it from different directions. I would like this to be kind of maybe put into one, and I don't mean to be formalistic, right? I don't need to see the same form every time, but it would help us determine what exactly is being asked of us. For certain, yes.
Can I just say for the record that I did not make a request? The
I didn't think
Attorney's
so.
Municipal Office did not make a request. So
It was assembly.
it was simply a draft to a question helping you guys out ahead of time because the question was coming our way.
Right, and we weren't even
So,
sure what the
It
question
was not in
was.
my
So,
capacity as municipal attorney
so I think it would help if we had a question before us. Does that,
or confirmation that we have
how
a
does the
question
board
before
feel? I
us.
don't mean to jump in there. Is that kind of
Well,
what you're saying?
I'd like to at least know what's going on, to
Yeah.
be perfectly honest. This is getting really weird, to be
Yeah,
honest. Right? I mean, I
yeah.
think we're getting sort of drafts being handed to us left and right. And as far as I can tell, there has been no official request for an advisory opinion. Barbara, you said that we could consider what you gave us as a request for an advisory opinion, but is that, should we follow up on that? I mean, so are you going to submit the form? You know, and so, I mean, and I'm happy to do it. We get an advisory
Yeah.
opinion, great, let's dig into it and let's do it. I just sort of want to know what's going on. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I mean, it's getting very strange in terms of if there's a question that the clerk's office or anyone subject to the code wants addressed, we can do that. Let's find out what the question is. Let's get the official request for an advisory opinion on the table, and this board will work hard to get it done as soon as possible. If people don't want that for whatever reason, they don't want some official statement from this board, then don't ask for that. I don't think the code allows a whole lot of this in between. It's not official, it's an opinion, but it's an informal opinion. The code does not, that is an animal that does not exist in this code. There's no such thing as an informal opinion from the Board of Ethics. So
Yeah.
let's have it. What do people want to do?
I'm gathering from my
This is-
bosses that my request is withdrawn.
This is what I
Okay.
propose. What I propose is adjourning today, and then all of this can
Mhm.
come at us in a single line of questioning next time, should you choose to do that.
Okay.
And from whatever direction it comes from, have it be kind of singularly.
I guess I wonder why do that, why circle around? If it's been withdrawn from this direction, I, of course, did not make a request, then it's a done issue. I don't know why we're circling back
No,
around.
if it shouldn't be brought, it shouldn't be brought. Don't bring
So
it.
it's a done
No,
deal.
but I mean, I'm just suggesting.
The
if
concern
you
might
want-
be, I mean, after I remember, the concern might be to get an advisory opinion on this matter if assembly members are concerned that people will file a notice of potential violation
Right.
against them for acting on, for sponsoring ordinances and
Right.
going ahead and voting. If they're concerned about that, if they feel that they're good to go given the previous advisory
Mhm.
opinion, then that's great. But if they want that extra clarity and protection that would come from having an official advisory opinion from the board, that's great. That might be a motivation to pursue the question, but
That's
That
up to
was
you.
not a motivation. That was
Okay.
not where this came from at all. They were not concerned about it. I suspect after your last meeting, Ms. Dombrowski may have some concerns, but the sponsors did not have any concerns. And so I would agree with Dee. If you can resolve this and I can withdraw it, you can take it off your agenda. That might be a good resolution.
We can feed this to Rick.
Yeah, and if I may, I believe that Solomon Holman's co-sponsoring of this actually took away the issue
Right.
because of his timing.
Well, that actually came up when I I reported to the subcommittee, and that was the first time we'd heard that Mr. Honeman actually was a co-sponsor, or I joined it later. I don't know how it happened, but regardless, that came up. Whatever. I just as soon not address this now. We can adjourn today, and then we'll take up our next meeting. I think we have a meeting next Wednesday. Is that correct?
We are meeting just next week, and so
Yep.
if
So-
people's minds change on this, and they do,
Yeah.
by all means, we can address it immediately next week.
We want to help you as best as possible, and we
Thank
want to
you.
make sure that we're as efficient and expeditious as possible too.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more business today? I think we're 4 minutes past our extension time, but I think that, are we ready to adjourn and we'll meet? Is everybody okay with next week's meeting?
Same time? Do 11:30?
Same time, 11:30. If that works for you all, I think it works well for us too. All right? Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second. All right, done.